Good day, Northwest. We are back with another cast for your Sunday morning listening and watching pleasure. We are on 1 month to live. We're continuing in this study. It's been a great study so far. Good morning, Aaron. How are you?
Great. Good morning, Terry. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's good to see you. We're, like I said, we're back to 1 month to live. We are on our last section of leaving boldly. The last lesson really challenged us for leaving boldly as we think about having 1 month to live and planning for our eventual departure. So what's interesting this time, Aaron, is where we're going to start is with planting seeds, day 24.
Day 24, yeah, planting seeds. Quite a way to think about how we begin to leave a legacy is by a metaphor of planting seeds. I guess the one question that we really have to answer as a part of all this is it really possible to live in such a way that the impact of our lives can be felt forever, or at least for a very long time?
Boy, that's a great question, right? That kind of puts it in perspective.
That's right. And so if we're searching for that or longing for that, where do we start?
Great.
So where do we start?
Yeah, great question. Where do we start? Do we think about it in these terms, right? As I read this chapter, I thought to myself, do we think about the seeds that we're planting? Do we think about even where to start so that we leave a legacy?
Yeah. It's interesting that when you think about a seed, you don't just grab a handful of, I don't know, whatever, and just put them somewhere. Usually you're very specific about what you're trying to plant.
Very intentional, exactly.
And where do you need to plant that item? Because otherwise, if you just grab a handful of something and throw them out, maybe you're planting poison ivy. I don't know. Seeds?
Yeah.
Unless you're trying to get rid of someone.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah. No. But yeah, it's like, what are we trying to plant?
Right.
To really make an impact on somebody else and to leave a long-term legacy.
Right.
It was interesting, from Psalms 145:4. Thought this was an interesting way for us to think about this. And I included two different versions here of this verse. Families of this time will praise your works to the families to come. They will tell about your powerful acts. That's a translation. And then from the Message, generation after generation stands in awe of your work. Each one tells stories of your mighty acts. What a way to think about how if we actually make an impression, that it will be passed down from family to family or generation to generation, telling about what that you've actually planted in their life or what you've done, just like we tell the stories of what we see God has done in our lives.
Exactly. So often we're focused on just the moment, right? We try to get through the days, we try to get through the weeks, and then all of a sudden something happens, right? And we gain our perspective a little bit and say, wow, maybe I should have been planting seeds. Maybe I should have done this differently. And it's too easy to slip into the let's think about only today mindset.
Only to today's mindset. Yeah, and we talked about the greatest or the best times to plant a tree a couple of weeks ago. It's 30 years ago and then today. So we might as well get started. But then it comes back to the question, how do we get started?
How do we get started? It's a great question. How do we get started?
It is. I don't know. Let's see if we've got anybody else who's smarter than us.
We do.
What'd you say?
That's obvious that we do.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. Yeah. And we're going to start in a good place for this one. It's in a parable.
Okay.
The sower from Matthew 13, verses 1-8. Normally the parable of the story, when Jesus defines the parable of the story, it's really about the hearer. How is the person who hears it? How is their heart? Are they rocky? Are they ready to hear that and for it to change their lives? But we're going to really talk about this story today from the sower's perspective. And it's interesting how it's called the parable of the sower, but most of the time it's about the hearer.
Right, exactly. We've never thought about it this way, right? So often, like you said, we think about the hearer, right? Where does the seed fall? On which of those grounds does it fall? Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to flip it on its head and say, it is called the parable of the sower. So what about the sower? What's his responsibility? What's his role?
What is his role? That's right. You know, at the most basic level, you know, it's a parable about faith, because the farmer has faith in his seed and its ability to yield a crop. He knows what he's planting, and he has faith that when he seeds it and it's taken care of, that it will actually be something eventually. In essence, he's planting a seed of faith. And if we're going to actually live a life that outlasts us, you know, then we must continually plant, you know, those seeds of faith in both ourselves and many others around us.
Right. Do we see ourselves as the sowers, right? I think oftentimes, even if we have a flash of thinking of ourselves as planting seeds, we get frustrated, right? Think about that. We get frustrated on the seeds that we throw on the rocky soil or on the soil that gets burnt, right? And the seed doesn't grow. Are we ready to really participate as a sower and be satisfied with the results because of our faith?
Right. And it's not always about, you know, we don't always get to see the results. Just like we talked about these planting a tree 30 years ago. You know, we as the sower need to be faithful to be continually sowing and not so worried about the outcome.
Right.
Because, you know, if the sower does throw it on the rocky ground, who's to say that rocky ground someday may not have someone there that's ready to receive it?
Exactly. Years later, right?
Years later, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we as the sower take the responsibility on ourselves, or the outcome, you know, is really about us, but it's not really about us.
Right. It's just about us sowing. It's about us planting those seeds, and then the soil and the Lord makes the determination of the outcome.
That's right. And we just have to keep sowing and sowing and sowing, because that's one of our calling, is to be faithful, and to be faithful about sowing.
And to your point from earlier, right? What seeds are we throwing out there, right? Are we throwing out poison ivy? That's a great example. You know, how often in our lives do we think, yeah, I probably shouldn't have sown that seed as I look back on a situation? Mm-hmm. Or are we throwing out fruit trees? Are we throwing out vegetables? Are we throwing out stuff that will be productive in people's lives, whether we see the result or whether it's in the future?
That's right. You know, it's interesting. And sometimes we could be throwing out rocks. Mm-hmm. Something with no potential or no life or no fruit. People look at us and say, wow, look, all that stuff he's throwing out there. And some of those are really big seeds. Maybe it's just a rock, and we're doing things that have no future meaning for us. But it makes it look important. Right.
That's a great point, right? If we were to examine the seeds that we throw out, are they really seeds? Do they have a future potential, or are they just for show? Right, a big rock. Hey, it looks big, but it's impressive. But yeah, really, it's just for ourselves and not for future generations.
That's right. So it's so important that we know what we're sowing during that process, and making sure it's the appropriate seed. So often we can, you know, give a seed that doesn't need to be in that area, and it may not reap the ultimate goal that we have. So we, as the sower, need to be very careful and conscious about that.
Right. So how do we apply this to our lives, right? What's the application to us as we think about this? So, I mean, we all know the parable of the sower, and we have heard it from the perspective of the hearer, but how do we apply this to 1 month to live and leaving boldly?
Yeah, that's a great one, because when we think, you know, if we really only had 1 month to live, would we be so much more intentional about who and how we talk to those different people? Would we expand our circle? We've talked about that many times. Or maybe our circle's too small. Who do we need to include in our daily touch points?
Right. Yeah, would we be as dismissive to what we perceive as rocky soil? Right. So sometimes we make decisions like, well, I don't need to spend time with this person, or try to influence this person, or try to evangelize this person, because I've already made a judgment about them. And so I'm not going to scatter seed in their direction. I refuse. Right. That's not up to us. Our as the sower is to sow across all the different types of soil.
Yeah. As you read the parable, the sower isn't making the decision about where the seed goes. Right, continues to sow the seed, and Jesus is talking about it's the responsibility of the hearer, to understand, their heart and how they may or may not receive it, or so that they can understand the condition of their heart. But really, the sower continues to need to sow.
Right. Absolutely. Man, what a great perspective. Flip
It
it.
is. It is. Always good to kind of flip something on its head and see what you get out of something.
Right. It's perfect.
Yeah. And most farmers will tell you that sometimes it's where you plant is also as important as what you plant. And we've talked about seeding, everywhere, but at times, we can't be everywhere. And at times our efforts need to be more focused. When I'm home with my family, I need to be very specific with my girls. There's many parents and grandparents who can be very specific with their family first and put their first efforts, into those groups, because that's what's most important at that time.
Right. Yeah, timing is a big piece of this, right? We can't sow seed all the time everywhere, but we have to be particular, right? Especially now with us locked down, right? We have more of an opportunity to influence the people who are really closest to us, and even so, people at a distance, but differently, right?
Differently. That's right. Yeah. And if we want to know, if our life is really going to matter, let's take care about these seeds that we're sowing.
Right.
Always important. So what do you got next?
We have Van Gogh and Millet. Is it Millet? Malay?
I think it's Malay, actually. People are going to look at this and think these guys are cultured, but I don't know if that's the
If I can't even pronounce it, I don't think we're that cultured.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Malay and Van Gogh. So, I guess one of my devotionals that I read on a routine basis has been on Van Gogh for the last probably month or month and a half, and really diving into Van Gogh with some of his paintings and some of his religious beliefs. Now, if you know anything about Van Gogh, you could probably also call him Van Crazy. He wasn't always in his right mind, and he had a very rocky relationship with the church. The local church didn't usually get along, and he was criticized significantly for that. But at times in his life, he had a very strong faith. And the part of the devotional that I read recently was comparing a Malay painting to a Van Gogh. And in the Malay painting, the sower was a key part, or the largest part of the picture. And Malay had several paintings like this, where the sower was so important as a part of his canvas. But Van Gogh always made it more of a minor part. Well, the sower was important. It was, what is the big picture also looking like? You can see a pathway, a rocky pathway. You can see birds probably landing and eating the seeds. You can see also, that the sun coming up and what's going to happen in the future. And the sower is there to complete his purpose, so that God can really make happen what needs to happen. Continue to be faithful. And it's not about us. And it should never be about us. Although we're concerned about our legacy, we need to have something bigger in mind. And that bigger thing is if we are holding on to the important things, like Paul says to Timothy, guard the trust, us passing that on should not be about us, but always pointing everyone to the sun. In this case, the bright sun that's rising in the back of the picture.
Right. Well, and also I love the field that's in the background too, right? So even though there may have been a crop, even though there has been some produce, right, that he still hasn't stopped. Too often in our lives, we see a little bit of success and we say, hey, that was success, right? I don't need to do anymore, right? I've done what I was asked to do, but yet here in this picture, in this image, it's nope, there's good progress in the background, but keep doing what you do every day. Keep sowing every day.
Yep, keep sowing each and every day. And it's just important for us to be there and to continue to lay out our life in front of people, especially those that are so important to us, because life will pass us by, and what are we really leaving behind?
Yep. How are we leaving boldly?
How are we leaving boldly? That's right.
Exactly.
Maybe 30 years from now, when somebody listens to this, they can look back and say, oh, I remember those guys. How did they do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we'll be 3D holograms like in Star Wars, and they will have really transformed these videos. I love that idea.
We'll see how much more gray we have.
Probably the same.
Probably the same. No, I think mine's going faster.
So we have
Yeah,
another slide.
we do. We do. This was an interesting concept of Ikos, which is the Greek meaning for extended household. And really the most important influential sphere is your Ikos, which is your immediate family. But then how are you reaching out to others? And again, as we've talked about, expanding our circles, we can be very specific how we reach out into these other circles to really make a difference and to plant seeds that are going to make a difference long term.
Right, right. And it's not just, like we were saying earlier, it might not just be the people in your household. It might be people that you influence, your neighbors, your coworkers, people that you have classes with or school with. And now even people that might be strangers, that you just have an opportunity to smile. David gave us an example a couple of weeks ago that he just smiled and had a 30-second conversation with a couple in the store, and it seemed to calm them down, and he connected with them. So how much of that, is in our influence? How much is in our circle that we can influence?
That's right. If we as disciples are going to continue to make disciples, we can't reach everyone. We can't reach millions of people in most cases. But if there's even, 5 to 10 people in each of these circles that we as a family continue to reach out to and to make a concerted effort to impact, we will make an impact.
Right.
And
it's all about how much seed we're sowing, right? Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. And then as we impact someone, it just continues to grow. It's the multiplication effect.
Right, right. How much seed are we willing to sow? Are we willing to sow with people we don't know, or are we willing to sow with people we know that might not accept what we have to tell them? A coworker or a friend that we think, I can't really talk to them about church or about Jesus. They might not like me anymore, right? Are we willing to change who we are to leave boldly, to leave our legacy?
Yes, exactly. And when you, I guess I've done the Henry Blackaby Experiencing God series several times. And one of his main points is look for God where God is already working and join him there. Because a lot of times there's people that are looking, to be touched or looking for Jesus. And if we just look for those moments and say, hey, I can join where God is already working, that's continually planting those seeds that are going to have the soil that is ready to really hear what our message or our legacy wants to be.
Right. Doesn't it stand to reason that the more seeds that we scatter, the more likely we are to hit soil that is ready to hear what we have to say?
That's right. We shouldn't be stingy.
Right. Exactly. Because sometimes we are.
Yes, we are. Yes, we quickly, as you mentioned before, we quickly judge whether they're worthy. Mm-hmm. I know the Bible also says, be careful of throwing pearls to swine. Mm-hmm. But yet at the same time, people need to hear the good news and be influenced. And if we're prejudging people and not sharing with them, how are they going to know?
Exactly. Like the slide says, it all begins with your Ikos.
Mm-hmm. Right. We need to work on our Ikos and then start to influence others around us. Yeah, it's a very interesting concept.
All right. Yeah, I think this is something I'm going to dig into more. So thanks for introducing us to that.
Yeah, no problem.
So Teresa and I recently rewatched a movie called Meet Joe Black.
I do remember that.
Anthony Hopkins and Brad Pitt and Claire Forlani. It's really a great movie. It's nearly 3 hours long, so you should prepare for that, right? It's not the length of a YouTube video, right? You're not going to be, riveted after 3 minutes. I mean, you have to watch the whole thing. But what's interesting about it is Teresa suggested it, and it ties in with our study because if you know the story, it's Brad Pitt as Death comes back to Bill Parrish, Anthony Hopkins' character, to take him away. And he tells him, you have a limited number of days, right? And in the context of what we've been studying, Aaron, it really put it in perspective about what if we knew? What if we knew that, Saturday night after the party, that was it? And there's some interesting things that happen, some great quotes. But one of the quotes from the movie is, don't wait until death shows up before you start learning how to live. So, so many times we are busy about our own lives, right? And we do the things that are in the moment and we do the things that are in front of us. But it's easy to pass up the opportunity to plant seeds until we know what's really in perspective. One of the questions that Brad Pitt as Death asks Anthony Hopkins, he says, why are you continuing about your daily business when you know that this is coming to an end? And I'm paraphrasing, of course. And so that question really hit me like, wow, if we knew what was important when we've got 1 month to live, what would we change? That's what this whole study is about. And how many times we push off what is eternally important for what is imminently immediate, right in front of us. And we lose our perspective and we don't plant seeds and we don't end up leaving boldly and doing all the other things that we've talked about.
Very. It's been a while since I've seen this movie, but maybe I'll have to rewatch as well. But it's, the question to all of us is, are we going to die someday? The answer is yes. And so why aren't we, doing the things that are eternally important when we know that's coming? But so often we refuse to accept that fact. We believe we have time in the future to change things, but we may or may not. We never know what's coming around the corner. And right now, we didn't see this virus when we started this discussion of 30 days to live. So many people, obviously, around the world have been impacted, significantly by this, and family and friends, and nobody would have seen this coming. And how are we preparing, for life?
Exactly, right. How are we preparing, right, in case this is us? So
in case this is really us with 1 month to live.
Yep. Are we planting the seeds? So yeah, very, very good ideas, right? Very good perspective. So I love the parable of the sower, right? It's called the parable of the sower. So
that's right. So grab a Bible, Matthew 13. Most of the chapter is about, or at least half is about this parable. So I encourage you to read it.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully we've given people a new set of glasses to read that particular parable with, right? And think about it a little differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good discussion, Terry.
Good discussion, Aaron. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful, as always.
Yeah. Happy Sunday.
And hello to all 12 of our viewers. So you have a great Sunday.
All 12.
All 12.
All 12. Very good. Well, we like each and every one of them then.
Absolutely. We certainly love them. So, all right. We'll see you next time, Aaron. Thank you very much.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.